Donald Trump is expected to announce his choice for vice president in just days, perhaps at the Republican National Convention, just 3 days away. Or maybe sooner. Speculation about who's made the shortlist includes Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, and former North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. All three have cozied up to Trump in recent weeks. Rubio was at the former president's side at a rally held Tuesday at his golf club in Florida, where Trump teased a potential VP. Take a listen.
I think they probably think I'm going to be announcing that Marco's going to be vice president. I don't know. Because that's a lot of press. That's a lot of press.
Speaking to Fox Radio News Wednesday, Trump expressed reservations about Burgum and Rubio, saying Burgum's choice to sign a total ban on abortion in North Dakota is problematic, though GOP has struggled on abortion messaging overall. On Rubio, Trump pointed out, saying that both of them do live in the Sunshine State. That could be a problem. The Constitution's 12th Amendment says that the president and vice president running on the same ticket, quote, shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves.
Meanwhile, Trump has sought to distance himself from Project 25. Rubio and J.D. Vance have too. Here's Rubio on CNN's State of the Union Sunday, followed by Vance. Let's take a look.
Our candidate's Donald Trump. I didn't say Donald Trump say that. Donald Trump's running on common sense, on restoring common sense versus the lunacy of the last 4 years and the far left and the shadow government that now is running our country with Joe Biden as its figurehead. That's what he's running against. Think tanks do think tank stuff.
You asked about Project 2025, and I want to be clear here that Trump explicitly has said his own transition team runs the Trump transition and will run the Trump administration.
So we are joined by Whitley again for this discussion. So who's your money on?
I would honestly say none of the choices that have currently been listed. Mm-hmm. I think that there are people who are positioning themselves to be his number two. And I think that the way in which Trump decides who his VP pick is going to be will be a little bit more meticulous in design than people are expecting. I think when looking at former Vice President Pence and how that relationship ended up in deterioration, he has to be very, very, very sure of his pick, and their relationship has to be solid. And when I say that relationship, what I believe Trump should be looking for is a balance. Someone who is more tepid waters, someone who engages the people and can just really meet people in the middle. And I think that that's what he's looking for. So when he looks at some of the, when we're looking at some of the candidates that they named, saying, well, this, person pushed for a full-out abortion ban, that is not something that I believe people in the middle would be looking towards. So I think we're actually probably going to see him pick none of the people that have been rumored. But of the people that I've heard that weren't mentioned in these clips would be like a Ben Carson. I could definitely see someone like a Ben Carson who has that level of temperament, similar to Mike Pence in temperament, but different in leadership style. And so I think we're going to have to wait and see. It'll probably come from left field, and it won't be any of the names that have been rumored or mentioned at this point.
So when you mention words like temperament and the fact that the RNC is all about Trump, does it really need to be somebody who's not going to overshadow the top of the ticket versus somebody who could step into the role of president if need be?
I think it has to be someone that can obviously lead in the way if something happened to President Trump. But when I am talking about tepid and I'm talking about temperament, I'm talking about someone who understands how to get things done, how to bring people together and build common ground with uncommon people. That's what I'm talking about. And so it's not necessarily about overshadowing, because to be honest, Trump hasn't been president for the past 3 years and he's taken up the media cycle in all of them. It's really hard to overshadow someone that is enigmatic like him and has that type of personality. So I don't think he's worried about someone that's overshadowing him, more someone that is going to complement him and his leadership style to be able to really bring people together.
Niall, do you have any names to throw in the mix?
Not names that weren't listed there. I mean, I suspect it's going to be J.D. Vance, but it's not that obviously I talk to people, but it's not like I have some independent confirmation of that.
Why J.D. Vance? Is it the Ohio connection?
I think that Vance is quite a good fit for the kind of right-wing or economic populism that Trump represents, the kind of blue-collar thing. Vance does have the disadvantage that obviously he criticised Trump quite heavily in the past around the time Hillbilly Elegy came out, but he's kind of remade himself as this Trump loyalist. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about as a Republican strategist is not to stomp on our own news here, but I wonder how much a VP pick for Trump really actually matters, because large swathe of the country hates him, large swathe of the country loves him. Mm-hmm. Are people really going to be swayed by who his number 2 is?
If I'm going to be honest with you, it's the people you didn't mention that'll be swayed. It's the undecideds and the independent voters in the middle who don't necessarily see a path forward for Biden, but definitely have experienced Trump's leadership and they're not sold on that either. So who the number 2 is could be very impactful for undecideds and independents, specifically considering looming legal issues that Trump is having. It is a very important choice, and I don't think it's one that independents, undecideds, and that the nation should take lightly.
Are there really any undecideds left when it comes to Biden and Trump, right? The folks that we're calling undecided are folks who are just apathetic about the election, feel like this is a terrible choice that we have at this moment of electing 2 old white men again, and the same thing we saw 4 years ago. So how do you get people enthusiastic when Biden and Trump are very much set in people's minds for who they are? Are you saying that a VP will help with enthusiasm?
I don't think that it's enthusiasm is what's needed at this point in time, at least on the Trump side. I don't think it's enthusiasm that's needed. There's a momentum unlike any other that we've seen growing, whether that's from donors, whether that's from support, whether that's from rallies. So it's not necessarily the enthusiasm. It's going to be the experience of being able to get things done. And people want to know that whoever the number 2 is that he picks is going to be able to get things done, is going to be able to be a decisive leader, and is going to be able to bring people together. Once again, we know how Trump leads. We know how he is when he dislikes something. He's a very vocal leader, and he's not going to kowtow or hide how he feels about things. And so his number 2 needs to be someone that can bring people together and still unite and move towards action.
It's going to be hard to be Trump's number 2, right? After you look at Vice President Pence's experience in the first 4 years.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people are willing to change their views or to adapt their views for the sake of proximity to power, and I think that applies in both parties. Really, it's a difficult job for sure because you're beholden to Trump's whims to a degree. But I just wanted to let's take for the sake of argument the idea that it does actually matter who he chooses. And Nayyera mentioned, that we have a presidential contest with 2 old white men. Do you think? I mean, is there any merit, for example, in choosing a female vice president if you're Trump? Or is it more about finding someone who's more aligned with his views? Like, I never thought, for example, Nikki Haley was a realistic possibility because she's just very different in her actual worldview to Trump is. Is there any merit in a female running mate for him, do you think?
I don't think the merit would come from her being a woman. I don't think it would come from her gender. I think it would come from the level of experience. I think it would come from the way in which she would carry herself, but it wouldn't be solely based off of gender. If you haven't noticed, right, the Republican Party is not one that is championing such things as gender or putting people in places and positions solely based off of those types of characteristics. It's always going to be the merit of their work, and it's always going to be what they bring to the table and not the things on the outside that can't be changed to add to the table.
The Republican Party is not prioritizing things like gender. 52% of the country are women. Women's health, very unique experience. Can you elaborate then on how that is a good choice for the Republican Party right now?
It's not that they're not focused on women's issues or that they're not focused on connecting with women voters. What I'm saying is that they're not going to place someone in a position solely based on them being a woman because they're going to play into identity politics. What they're going to do is look at the character and what that person brings to the table to pick the right choice, to pick the best choice. And if that happens to be a woman, then it's going to be because she is best suited to serve in that role or position, not just because she's a woman.
What do you think? I mean, this is not a trick question or anything.
Yeah.
What do you think about I mean, the Republican platform for the first time did not have a promise of a national abortion ban on one hand. On the other hand, it was Trump who appointed the 3 conservative justices who made it an easy majority to repeal Roe versus Wade. Do you think that the anti-abortion position of the Republican Party hurts them with women writ large?
I do not believe that. And I think that that's something that has been permeated quite a bit, and that's something that I believe that the left want to carry, right? And I do know a lot of women that it does they have issues with abortion. I would say, but the greater scheme and the women that I'm connected with and the women that I'm talking to care more about the types of schools that their children are going to be able to go to, the level of education that they're getting, making sure and attempting to keep their children safe right now, limiting what they're able to see on their devices and making sure that their mental health is going to be okay. Those are the things that they are worried about. And I haven't necessarily seen abortion be on the table in terms of women voters making huge waves in changing their position, in changing who they're going to vote for. You're actually seeing more women in alignment with the Republican Party, more mothers in alignment with the Republican Party. And that's usually just based upon the social issues that are happening of the day, focused on their children and not them in particular.
That's not what the state activism or the 2020 midterm results were indicating, though. You had a state like Kansas where they had a constitutional amendment on the line, right? Like straight states' rights, and people, not just women, turned out in droves to knock that down. I think you were starting to see that idea of women didn't have to care or had ideas about abortion because they had the privilege and ability to have a choice on it. And now that choice has been taken away and changed, it is now a serious healthcare issue where doctors don't know what they can get arrested for or not arrested for in doing, the clearing out of a miscarriage, which is officially a medical abortion, right? So that's some of I think the challenge we're seeing on how the old way of defining abortion has fundamentally shifted. And that is how I think even families and mothers like myself are touching the issue and experiencing it. I mean, you've got sitting representatives of Congress who say they are pro-life, who say IVF should never happen. You should never be able to have babies through the support of science because why? I mean, right? Like that's starting a family. So these are not the challenges that the Republican Party necessarily needed politically. But it does exist. It is there as a massive issue, particularly for suburban women and families that are looking to expand.
And what I will say to the credit of what you just stated is that a lot of the states that had triggers from the Supreme Court that went into effect directly, I don't believe that was the best way to do it. In Indiana, that's not what happened. And so to call a special session, to talk about it, to hear from constituents is important. And then to make an educated decision based upon what you're hearing from your constituents, to me, is the right way. So any of the trigger laws that happened, I don't believe it provided a forum for people to really express themselves and then for lawmakers to go and do what is right based upon hearing from the constituents. And so I believe that's what you saw in the midterm. But now, as it's back in the state's hands, there are a lot of different nuances to this conversation that have to be fixed. I believe that what you're going to see is not only a shift in the Republican Party from being pro-life, but to being pro-livelihood. When I say pro-livelihood, what I mean is supporting the totality and life of not just that child, but the mother, and understanding what the livelihood is going to be. That's looking at adoption services and how we are providing and making adoption easier. That's looking at the infant and maternal mortality rate and reducing that to the lowest amount possible. And so what you're going to see is a shift in policy from basically being solely about abortion to not only the nuances, but the health of the child and the mother.
Republican strategist Whitley Yates, thanks for joining us. More Rising after this.